I grew up in Brooklyn, in the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn, and my father had a dry cleaning store, tailoring dry cleaning store, and my mother worked there. You know, it was a mom and pop business. I went to boys' high school in Brooklyn, and I remember when the war broke out, and I was in the gym, and the gym teacher was telling us that every one of you kids are going to be in the service before this war is over, so prepare for it. And my brother Ernest was his name, Ernie. He was 2 years older than I was, and he was drafted. And then my older brother, actually, he was in the Seabees. I turned 18, I was drafted, and went into basic training, and it was Fort McClellan, Alabama. I was in England for a few weeks, and I didn't know where we were going from there. The only traveling I did when I was a kid was from Brooklyn to Manhattan on the subway. One day I think it was about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, they got us all up, and we had full field packs, and they shipped us out, and I didn't know where we were going, but we were going on ships to the beaches. And I was in the 4th Infantry Division. We landed at Utah Beach. Of course, there was some fighting through France, but we moved fairly quickly through France. I mean, the French were so happy to see us. They were giving us bottles of wine, and hugs and kisses and flowers. We were treated like heroes, like celebrities. You couldn't ask for a better reception. The major fighting for me was in the Hürtgen forest, and that's where we had a lot of problems. The forest was booby-trapped. It was zeroed in by the Germans. They expected us there. They knew exactly where we were every minute of the time there. I think we lost 10% per day, men hit 10% per day. We lost a lot of men. That was brutal. But then we were relieved and sent to a town called Echernach, which is in Germany, and it was on the Moselle River. And that was supposed to be for rest and rehabilitation. And we were not in Echernach very long when actually I was on outpost duty. It was December 14th, and we were up on a hill overlooking the river, and the other side of the river were the Germans. And they apparently were also on rest and rehabilitation. And it was the morning of December 16th, and the guy who woke me and gave me the binoculars said, "You have to look at this, you have to look at this." And we looked out, and we saw over the river Germans crossing the river and coming toward us. That was the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge. And we called down below to the headquarters, and they told us that there were really, I think the expression they used, we're up to our ass in krauts, you better get out of there. It was like bedlam. There were Americans running in all directions. And we ended up in Liège, Belgium. And Liège, Belgium at the time, you wouldn't know there was a war on. I mean, civilians were walking around, they were going to their jobs, and there's a lot of GIs there, a lot of soldiers there. And then finally, there was an officer walking around gathering stragglers, us, to form a line outside Liège because they expected an attack by the Germans. And this was Christmas Eve. Sure enough, at dawn, they came running across the field. The Germans came running at us. A lot of them. We came in. And we opened fire from the foxholes, but we knew that we couldn't control them. We were overwhelmed. When all of a sudden, from behind us, came fresh troops. They ran out into the field, and they were firing at the Germans. The Germans were falling like flies, and the rest of them were running back to the woods for cover. And it was the 28th infantry. And we knew we always recognized each other from the patches on the shoulder. And their patch was shaped like a vase, and it was red. And we called them the bucket of blood. And they really saved us. And they went through. And at that point, there was an officer coming by telling us all that we were being relieved and to go back. I remember the next mission was to take a town, and I even remember the name of the town was Führen. Now this town had been retaken several times, and we were told to take the town and hold it. So I was with a lieutenant at the time. He said, we're going to hold up in the basement at the farthest end of town, and he told all of us to meet him there. And so I'm coming across, and all of a sudden something hit me in the ankle. It felt like somebody hit me with a rock, knocked me off my feet. And I didn't even know what it was. It happened to be a bullet that went through my ankle. But all it felt like was somebody hit me with a rock, and it was hot and burning. So I got up and I continued on, and it stung a little, it wasn't that painful. And I met him at this basement, went down into the basement, and he said, he looked at it and he said it looked like a bullet went through there. And he said, why don't we have some food, K-rations we had at the time, and he lit a fire in the stove. And I said to him, I remember saying, shouldn't we be prepared for a counterattack? So at the time, I remember he said, don't worry about it. He no sooner said that when there were Germans outside the basement, and we could see them through the basement window. And there were, I think, 2 or 3 that we could see. And they were hollering, come out, and they were waving hand grenades. So anyway, we walked out with our hands up, and it turned out to be a German combat patrol that was apparently sent in to take prisoners because they wanted information, which was lucky for us, because if they weren't coming for prisoners, we would have been dead. And then I realized that I had my dog tags on, and my dog tags were stamped H for Hebrew, and that was not a good thing. So I unhooked my dog tags and dropped them in the side of the road. And we walked to a farm. It was I think it was an abandoned farm. Anyway, there was a stall that could have held at one time horses. The hayloft was up a set of stairs, and there was a German officer who was interrogating us. I dropped my dog tags in the road, but I forgot I had a pay book in my pocket. And the pay book also had an H for Hebrew on it. And he had a Luger on the desk. And then he said to me, you are a Jew. And he called me a gefruchtene Juden. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but since then I found out it was a dirty bastard Jew, something like that. And he got very angry with me, and he picked up the Luger. I thought he was going to shoot me, but instead he just pushed me out the door, down the flight of steps. I rolled down the flight of steps, but I was not hurt at all, and I was very relieved. After I was captured and I was in a labor camp, I was a prisoner in a labor camp, there were about 50 of us in this little farming town, and we were housed in the attic of a one-room schoolhouse where we slept on hay. Every day we went out to a work project, and the project was to slice logs and then cut them into chips. They used that for fuel for the trucks. One day I was there chopping wood, and I guess I was about 18 years old, and I think I looked about 14 at the time. And I was there chopping when I heard somebody kind of whistling to me. And I turned around, there was a lady at the door, had the door open in the house, and she beckoned, she called me over. So I dropped what I was doing, I went there, and she grabbed me by the arm, pulled me inside, and she put her finger to her lips, signaling me to be quiet, and she put me in a closet. I didn't know what was going on, and gave me a big bowl of food. I guess they knew that we were being starved. And it was, I would love to have know who she was and where I could find her to thank her, you know, for that. It was really a nice gesture. Because at the time, as a prisoner, we were being fed 2 slices of bread and a bowl of watery soup once a day. The Americans kept moving north, and we were winning the war. Every time they got close to catching up, they moved us north, and they moved us at night because during the day we were being strafed by our own planes. We moved in country roads, and the roads were very winding roads, and the guards were spaced about 20 feet apart. And I figured that if I walked behind the guard, as we turned a corner, the guard in back would not be able to see us because he would be around the curve. He had 20 feet in back. So I would wait until we got to a sharp curve and walk behind the guard, and then just drop into the brush alongside the road, and then just wait there until the whole column passed, and then I can move the other way and head. I did that 3 times. The second time I escaped with the tall guys from Texas, and we did it the same way, you know, by walking behind the guard and ducking into the brush, you know, before the other guard could see us. So we got into this bombed out building and found an entrance into the basement of this house. So we went down there and we went to sleep, figuring nobody's going to bother coming into that place. Sure enough, it wasn't maybe an hour or 2 later, we were being poked with rifles and bayonets, and we woke up and they were surrounded by several old Germans in World War I uniforms. In fact, one had a helmet with a pointed on top, you know, in World War I. And they marched us to a courtyard. And we get into this courtyard, and finally we get the idea that they're going to shoot us. We didn't understand why or how, but we tried to explain to them that we were just lost. We're trying to find our way back to, you know, to the people who captured us, but I don't know if they bought that. But anyway, they put us up against a wall, and it looked like they were arranging a firing squad. And just then, a German officer happened to be walking by, and he asked them what was going on. And they said, we caught 2 American spies, and we're going to shoot them. And so the officer said, well, you can't do that. We have to interrogate them. And so we're walking down. He spoke English very well, and he says, you guys are very lucky. He said, if I hadn't come by, they would have shot you. These guys are crazy. They're pretty nutty guys. The third time was I had been taken to a Stalag. Stalag 12, I think it was 12A, in Lindburg, Germany. And I wasn't there more than a couple of weeks. They had to evacuate that Stalag. And again, I got behind a guard and dropped into the brush. So I waited till dawn. It was getting daylight, and I decided it was safe to move in. So I moved into the town looking for a house where I can get into a basement or hide somewhere during the day and then travel at night. So I got into this house. I opened the door, but I guess I made noise trying to open the door, and there was a flight of stairs on my right, and a woman appeared at the top of the stairs, and she's asking who I was. So she asked if I was a Russian or I was a Polish, so I said American. She said, oh, American. So she called, there were a bunch of other people came out from different areas, and they were all chatting amongst themselves, and finally she came downstairs. She opened the door to the basement. She pushed me in there and locked the door behind me. I didn't realize it, but my leg had become infected. I had gangrene, I had a swelling under my armpit, I had a swelling in my groin, and I was feverish, and I was very weak because I also had been starved for a while. So I just, down in this basement there were bed springs, no mattress, just springs, but I just dropped on one of these, there was like a cot, and I went off to sleep almost immediately. Next thing I know is I hear a key rattling, the door is open, and this woman comes in, and she greets me like a long-lost friend, and she brings me upstairs, up this flight of stairs into her apartment, and she gives me a big bowl of food, and she asks if I want to take a shower, and she's like, I'm a long-lost relative. And that's my second encounter with, German civilian. And it turns out that it was a family. I was there for several days. She treated me like family. And finally, she came running to me one day saying, come quick, and look out the window, and there was a group. It was an advanced armored patrol down outside. So I went out and I introduced myself, and they interviewed me, and they treated me, sent me to a hospital. Actually, I went to a hospital in Paris. Doctors told me that another week I would have lost my leg because it was advanced gangrene, and the swelling that I felt in my groin and under my armpit was actually, toxic. It was poisonous stuff. He said that another week I would have lost my leg, and a week after that I probably lost my life, or maybe 2 weeks after I lost my life. And the thing that saved me was penicillin, which was brand new at the time. I was not in good shape.
And how much did you weigh?
80 pounds. I mean, I was not a big guy to begin with. I was about 145, 150, but 80 is kind of bad. I was in a hospital a long time. And I was there for at least a month or two. And then they flew me to Halloran Hospital in Staten Island. And that was a veterans hospital at the time. And I was there for several months in Halloran Hospital. And that's when my parents were allowed to visit me. They were so happy to see me because my brother was killed. He was killed in the Hürtgen forest. Actually, he took a bullet in the head, and I didn't learn about that until I was discharged. I knew that he had been killed when I got home. They didn't tell me while I was away, but when I got home, I learned that he was killed. We were both in the Hürtgen forest at the same time.
Now,
Didn't know it. My older brother, he was okay. He was in the Navy in the Seabees, and he got out all right and discharged. Everybody was in the service at that time. It was a draft. It was not like today. And it was not unusual for be a veteran or coming home. And it was just a relief to see people that you knew and friends and relatives coming back. A lot of them came back with serious wounds. I mean, my wound was nothing compared to what I saw. I mean, I had a friend, he had both arms were blown off by a booby trap. He had hooks on both hands. But I was very relieved, that I came back in one piece. And the government was very good to me. They paid for all college expenses, all school expenses. And then I had a disability compensation, which doesn't sound like much now. They gave me 10%, which was $11 a month. And at $11 a month, believe it or not, there was a nice bit of change. Well, the medals, I have the Purple Heart, and then I have Prisoner of War Medal, and then I have the Bronze Star, and then I have the French Legion of Honor they gave me, and then I have, this is a Distinguished Service Medal. It's a New York State, not a federal government medal. And then I have the Combat Infantry Badge, and we had a unit citation, and that's it. And,